All right, Dan, so first, you are the Perry Township Trustee. You are also a former Monroe County Democratic Party Chair, so you're pretty familiar with the politics of the poor and that sort of thing in Bloomington. I am assuming that the increase in violent crime in Bloomington sort of falls disproportionately upon the poor. Am I right or wrong about that?
Sort of. I think that we conflate a lot of violent crime. Of course, it falls upon the lower income categories, but the gun crime, I don't think belongs in that low income category. I grew up in America's gun culture. I mean, I'm from Monroe County, rural Monroe County. I've spent my whole life awash in America's gun culture, and guns are really expensive. And the people that we see in the parks, people we see on the streets, those people are not carrying that kind of weaponry around. So when we're talking about the visible poor, the street people, the people who commit street crimes, they do have a certain level of violence, but that's a level of violence of hitting someone with a bottle, pulling out a knife, stabbing them, that level of violence. The shootings is a different demographic. Those are people who have access to larger amounts of money and are carrying larger amounts of drugs, have access to people with larger amounts of money. There's a lot of money involved, and you see people taking that money and trying to get that money because you can't call the police if you have drug money. And I think that is coming to pass. It's what we're seeing is a very well-armed element of society that takes money to be armed, trying to make a lot more money with using weapons than we're accustomed to. One of the things that I noted in the report was the frequency of gun use. And I want to say 300 times, I believe was the number that was in it, 300 times in a year, guns were used, but the number that went with it was 70 times attempted murder. But if you shoot a gun, if you fire a weapon at somebody, that is an attempted murder. I mean, nobody shoots to wound. That doesn't happen. So it's kind of a way of making it appear safer than it really is. Again, going back to who has the weapons. And it's not the people we see that under the broken windows doctrine of graffiti and petty street crimes, that if we crack down on those, we will take care of violent crimes. The people out on the streets do not have access to firearms to do drive-by shootings. They don't have access to cars to do drive-by shootings. So we conflate what we see as a rough element with what we hear as gunshots. And that doesn't give us a very accurate picture at all of what really seems to be happening.
Is that all drug crime? I mean, what do you hear from your clients? You guys talk to the poor every day. Do you hear stories about violent crime?
Well, our clients live in, we call them the projects, a lot of income-based housing. And when I ask, they hear gunshots, they hear things going on. I don't think anywhere near the number of gunshots that people hear get reported. Sometimes people tell me it's just ambient background of people coming from larger urban areas for safety. And so what to us sounds like maybe a fusillade of random shots, to them is a relatively safe environment because where they're coming from is a war zone, literal war zone. But I don't think our local street meth heads are the ones who are running around pulling the triggers on each other. That's not to say that our street crime committers don't have access to firearms because, we're watching them nationwide. You might be able to pick up a 38 special at any given time. Once every 5 days, I would say, is probably understating how many shots are fired.
Where is it happening?
It's happening in parking lots. Some of the income-based housing projects, some of the quote affordable end quote housing projects, the older ones. There are crack houses, there are drug houses. It's not that hard for a person to find drugs from strangers. I don't think you're gonna see them randomly on the streets downtown. I don't think you're gonna see them randomly on the streets on the east side. I think you're going to see them around the apartment complexes. Again, the gun crimes seem to follow the drugs that are associated with lower income communities and IU parties. Always kind of surprised at the number of violent episodes there are at those giant IU parties out toward the 17th Street areas and in there. There's always been that town gown conflict, but now there's something else afoot there, But we've created this boogeyman, this big boogeyman who is frightening everybody, and we're scared of the wrong things. Who is it? It's not the people we're supposed to be afraid of. Why is it? It's really related to drugs. Is it the street meth? No, it's not street meth. Is it the fentanyl? Maybe, but is it the street fentanyl? No, those are the people, those are the users. It may be the dealers. You just don't cook up fentanyl in your bathtub. It comes from somewhere. Most of it comes from across the border, and it does come through very well organized networks. And at what point it leaves those very well organized networks, somewhere between Chicago Airport, Detroit Airport, and Bloomington is when it leaves the hands of the people who are very bad people, between the airports and the streets. But you just don't go out and shop for fentanyl. It's coming from some very bad people. Yeah, I thought I saw 2009 was a takeoff, just in raw numbers. 2009 starts to tie in with the beginning of the opioid epidemic, the acknowledgement of the opioid problem. And then 2014 was the meth and the opioid problem. Until 2014 or so, meth was, it's these guys who are cooking it up in their bathtub labs and things like that. And there was very little acknowledgement, even though it's happening then. And a lot of us were saying it's coming from Mexico. It's the cartels are flooding 80%. If you go back 2015, 80% of the meth in America was coming across the border. And who were we chasing? Some guy down in Paoli that was buying antihistamines. And that's when we outlawed antihistamines, was 2016. So it was disjointed, but 2009 there was an increase in violent crime. 2014, 2015, another big bump. And I think you can correlate it directly with the drug usage, but the model that I use is colonization and imperialism. We're a community with money. We're being colonized by these exterior suppliers of drugs, fentanyl, meth. They come in, trade their goods for our money, and the money gets exported out of the community. And that is what we are. We're a colony being exploited, and our resource that they want is money. Drugs do not come from within the community. There's just not the resources to make enough meth, to supply the meth.
So when we were talking before online, You talked about some things that experiences that you had heard from people about being exposed to guns. What were you talking about? You said you've heard from too many people.
Having guns flashed at them in traffic, not on the sidewalk. People on the sidewalks I've heard having swords flashed at them, having knives, cane swords, things like that. But being in traffic, in particular out around campus at night, honking a horn and all of a sudden someone's waving a gun, things like that. That never happened that I know of, but people, man, you won't believe what happened to us Saturday night. Someone pulled a gun out and waved it at us. Out around the mall, things like that. Not road rage kind of things, that me and you running into each other, but just confrontations, real power plays as opposed to road rage or anger things. Yeah, not threats, just power. Used to be Axis up there. In there, it's not in that sidewalk up there, it's not unusual to see people flashing guns, letting people know that you're strapped, things in there. I mean, I know a lot of people who just quit going to the bars in downtown area because of the fear of a stray round getting them.
Well, that's the last thing I wanted to talk about was sort of what does this mean for the broader community? I mean, if you'll remember, there was a kerfuffle, I forget who it was, that said we are relatively safe. Bloomington's a relatively safe place, and I think somebody had a battle. Was that the mayor who said that? But what does this imply for the community at large?
Well, I think that we're relatively safe relative to what? We're relatively safe to the non-safe areas in Detroit, to the non-safe areas in Chicago, but overall, if you get shot, you're not safe at all. And more, it's just becoming more fashionable to play the gangster role, maybe. And it's just like the IU parties, where it used to be students were peace, love, dope, hippies forever, and the idea that now an IU party is suddenly gang city is just, it's so counterintuitive to me. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how they do it, but the open bars, the cheap drink nights, whiskey and someone with a gun is the worst combination I can think of. And yes, many people, I it's anecdotal, yes, but many people I know have told me that they simply do not feel safe in crowds downtown, in particular in the bars. However, when you're in bars with young people who've never been around gun safety and never been around people preaching restraint, teaching restraint, it's really a very dangerous thing. One of the things I've noticed is the bouncers in the downtown bars are 3 times the size of the bouncers when I was a young college student. Those guys are enormous. And I only know that because one of my nephews is one, and he has shown me his buddies, his pictures on his cell phone. And it's like, my goodness. He said, well, you gotta be. But he doesn't know they wear bulletproof vests. They wear Kevlar. And what kind of job is it in Bloomington, Indiana, that you have to wear Kevlar? We've heard the trope forever that my husband is a policeman, I never know when he leaves home, when he's not going to come back. Extend that. My husband's a bouncer downtown. I never know when he's not going to come back. And that's the level we're operating at now with gun crimes in Bloomington. or with the proliferation of guns in Bloomington.
I was going to ask about that. What is the proliferation of guns in society? I mean, how do you think that plays into what's happening here? Obviously, it's a factor, it would seem.
Yeah, and I'm not, I own firearms, okay, and I've just grown up with them. I've hunted all my life until the last few years when I gave that up. And I'm not anti-gun in that there are very responsible people with firearms. But I think the ability for the underground firearm market, there has to be something that can be done about that. And the ability to procure a firearm is just as easy as procuring a gram of meth. There's just no different. You know, if you're going to see someone who's selling you an illegal, heavy, hard, nasty drug, chances are that person can sell you a heavy, hard, nasty firearm too, because we've created this underground economy where they go hand in hand. And so people who are going downtown for the party atmosphere, the crazy party atmosphere, have access to this illicit economy. And back in the day, those were two separate things. But now they've been merged into this one big underground. Well, you can't be cool. You can't be selling huge amounts of Molly unless you're walking around strapped to, you know, to keep the bad guys away. Well, hell, it's turning out you are the bad guy, you know, and